out a long time ago that it's much easier to control people when we're all watching the same TV shows, listening to the same radio stations, going to the same movies, looking at the same billboards, eating the same food, and speaking the same language.
The freedom of speech is being taken away.
We don't care if it's true. Just say it, sell it. Anything you practice, you'll get good at, including BS.
And welcome to a brand new life, to a brand new day, all the way from the wastelands of California. My name is Michael, and I look forward to once again serve you those sounds of salvation. First-time listeners, turn on, tune in, and drop out. This is a very different kind of show, a place where we don't feel so alone. Let us chase away the light no matter what you at home choose to believe. I do admire you for your curiosity. Live and direct right now on the TuneIn Radio app. Search End of Days or go to michaeldecon.com. My guest tonight is John Lear. He is a retired airline captain and former CIA pilot, as well as the son of the famous inventor of the Lear Jet. He is a former Lockheed captain and is highly regarded in aviation circles. He has flown over 150 aircraft and earned every certificate granted by the Federal Aviation Administration. John also held 18 world speed records and has worked for 28 different aircraft corporations. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, John began coming forward with some startling revelations concerning the subject of aerial phenomenon and unidentified flying objects. Right now I do have Mr. John Lear on the line. Let's bring him in. How are you, sir?
Hey, pretty good. How you doing?
I'm pretty good. I can't complain. Thank you for being here again, John. I do appreciate your time on the program.
My pleasure.
The last time we talked was about perhaps 8 months ago, and I felt it was time for a little bit of an update with you, John. So how are you? Are you okay? Everything going well for you on your side of the desert?
Well, I'm still alive. I have a few medical problems, but I'm not dead yet.
Yes, that's a good thing. And I did want to give Mr. Jim Fetzer's best regards to you. He was on last night, and he was very excited that you were going to be on the program once again, and he wanted to say hello to you.
Yeah, that's great. I haven't talked to him for a couple of weeks.
Yes, he always puts you over when he comes on to the program. So, John, just for a little reminder for those who are new out there and never have heard of you, I thought we could go back just to your roots for a few moments here before we dive into things further. And,
okay.
Of course, being who your father was, would you say you followed in his footsteps?
Not exactly. He was an entrepreneur. He in 1930 he was making radios with Paul Galvin, and Paul Galvin they decided to split up, and my dad their techniques for stopping it.
Yeah, that was very strange. Not quite sure why the call just dropped there, but we are back, and what we were discussing before that call dropped was the roots of everything, and I had asked you if you were following in your father's footsteps, and you said, not quite. Go ahead.
No, he was an entrepreneur and designer. He had his own company called Lear Incorporated, which he sold in 1962 to Siegler. And in 1956, he was interested in building an airplane, actually modifying a Lockheed 18 transport, and he put on bigger engines and a few additions, and it became one of the very first executive twin-engine transports. It was called the Lear Star. And then in 1958, he wanted to build a twin-engine, another twin-engine airplane, and it actually started out as a twin-engine pusher with propellers, and Mitsubishi was going to build it. But then it evolved into a twin-engine jet, and became the Lear Jet. We lived in Switzerland at the time, and he was going to try and build it there. But when he got to going, the Swiss weren't as aggressive we were. They didn't have anything that they were turning out 200 or 300 types a year. So he moved all the tooling and engineering to Wichita, Kansas, where he had his pick of engineers. And that was in 1962. We made the first flight October 7th, 1963, and went on from there. He sold the company in 1967 to Gage Rubber, and it made, I think, changed hands another 7 or 8 times until now Bombardier holds it, and I think they've had it for many years. But they kept making different models. And my dad took the money he made from Gage Rubber for the sale of the airplane and decided to build a steam engine because he thought that steam was the way to go for engines in a car. But he was starting from ground zero, and he didn't know a lot about it. And he more or less pissed away $7 million. When he finally found out what Howard Hughes found out, when Howard Hughes tried to build a steam car back in 1935, that the horsepower is dependent on the size of the condenser. And to make enough horsepower to run an automobile, the whole car has to be the condenser, the frame, the top, the bottom, the trunk, the hood, everything. And of course, Hughes knew that wasn't going to work. But my dad didn't read Hughes' book and didn't know about that, and he went through $7 million before he realized it was a total impossibility. That was in 1975. In 1976, he started, there was an engineer working for him who had an idea for a twin-engine turboprop. And he decided that he would try and make that. It became called the Learfan, and what it was a very sleek airplane that carried about 6 to 8 passengers, had 2 turboprop engines inside the aft fuselage, which turned a single propeller, and was supposed to go about 300 miles an hour and have great operating procedures. But he died in 1977 from leukemia. I believe he contacted leukemia from the days in the early 50s when his Army friends would invite him up to see the nuclear blast, above ground blast at Yucca Flats in Nevada. And in those days, they didn't use any protection. All they had was eye protection. And of course, the incubation period for leukemia is from radiation is 30 years. So that was about the time it took him, and took him real fast. I think it was only about 90 days from the day he started to get sick until he was gone. When he died, he commanded his wife to finish the Lear fan project, which he did. And of course, I was very skeptical of the viability, and I told him that, and he didn't appreciate my ideas. And anyway, Mom went on and kept borrowing money and trying to get it into production, but they finally went bankrupt, owing about $400 million, and they only made 3 articles, and 2 of which were flying, and 1 was a test vehicle, and it never was successful in any way. But I've always wanted to be a pilot. My dad very much disliked that. he said, why do you want to be a pilot? He said, it's just like a bus driver. And in those days, I wasn't smart enough to say, well, what's the matter being with a bus driver? But he tried to talk me into being a lawyer or a doctor, and he said, and then you can own your own airplane. And I said, I don't want to own my own airplane. I want to fly it for somebody else. So we parted ways, and when he passed away, he didn't remember me in his will, which is fine with me because money has never meant that much to me.
Right. You guys had a very up and down relationship, John.
Pardon? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I started out as a commercial pilot, 18 years old, and during my career, I worked for 34 different aviation companies and airlines, and had a lot of fun, went a lot of places with a lot of different airplanes, and retired in 2001.
Right, and of course, once you started being more vocal about some of the things that we're going to talk about here tonight, that's when, I guess you can say, trouble really arose for you. You even were fired at one time because of this.
Yeah, and 1985 was when my interest got piqued in UFOs, and before that, I wasn't sure they existed, and I wasn't that interested anyway, but in 1985, I was running a reunion here in Las Vegas for Asia, and either military pilots or people that worked for different companies there, like Bird and Son and Air America and Continental Air Services Inc. And I ran into a friend of mine who was flying in Laos at the time, and we started talking. I said, where all have you been since I last seen you? And one of the places he mentioned was Bentwaters. And I said, yeah, Bentwaters, that's north of London. That's where that saucer supposedly landed in on Christmas 1980. He said, no, John, not supposedly. It did land, and I didn't get to see it because I was confined to my quarters, but I know the guys who did, and it's a very interesting story. And so I said, you mean the stuff is true about flying saucers? He said, yes, it is. So that's when my interest got piqued, and that was 1985, and I started collecting information. In those days, we didn't have an internet, and I did a lot of driving around California, Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, to meet with people who would not talk on the phone, but would talk one-on-one about their experiences. And I had gathered so much information that I wrote the infamous Lear hypothesis in 1986, in which I expressed what I thought was going on with the UFO field. And after that, everything I seemed to do seemed to get me closer to more information. And I met Bob Lazar, and at that time he was not working for Los Alamos National Labs, which he had been working for many years.
By the way, John, just let me stop you for one quick moment and quickly ask you, during this time period in your life, did your father ever say anything to you about this subject?
No, I can't remember him saying. He might have mentioned it, but there was no real story or anything. And in 1952,
yes,
Lear Incorporated, his company, was selected as the prime contractor by the Pentagon for anti-grav. And they had that contract for 4 years and completed it in 1956. And we had flying saucers in 1956. But in 1953, he went down to Bogota and gave an interview to the press down in South America, and they started asking him about UFOs, and he told them what he thought. And the Pentagon was extremely unhappy with him when he got back, and they kicked him out of the program. And even though Lear Incorporated had the contract, and there was other people working on it, he, the president, chairman of the board, could not have anything to do with it. And I imagine they told him that if he breathed a word about it, they would kill his family, his wife, his kids, his grandparents, his mother and father, his dog, his parakeet, his cat, and everything, everybody else. And I'm pretty sure that's why he never mentioned it. At least when I was around in those days, he had a couple of friends that had seen him, TWA pilots, and they used to talk about it, but he never said very much.
Well, I understand why he wouldn't be very vocal about that subject if they did, in fact, threaten him. My goodness. Speaking of which, go ahead.
Yeah, they made certain that he was never going to mention anything about it. Now, it's very interesting here that just recently I came upon a tape on the internet, YouTube.
Yes.
And it's called the Bonson UFO video. And it's a 22-minute home movie of my dad working on antigrav technology in a private laboratory, actually in the Bonson laboratory, with T-Towns and a lot of other people who were very involved in UFOs and antigrav technology. And it doesn't have any sound except for some music, and it has a lot of video or film in this laboratory, and it shows what they were doing. And every couple of minutes, it has a picture of a calendar, and the dates are being marked off and circled as if they were something very important to them. And I just came across this video about 6 months ago, and you go to YouTube, and it's the Bonson video. That's BAHNSON, Bonson video. And that was a very interesting video there.
Oh, wow. Yes, I'm going to have to look that up after the interview here. But yes, I'll take your word for it. That does sound pretty fascinating to check out. And speaking of which, just when was it? The day before yesterday, I believe you were doing some recording for some sort of, what was that, a TV show or a documentary about 9/11?
Yes, it's a group of people that got together and were going to brief President Trump on what actually happened on 9/11. And I think there were at least 20 or 30 of us, the people who really, really knew what the bottom line was and were experts in their own field. And they were invited to write a paper which would be all put together in one document. I think it ended up being 101 pages. And then it was given to President Trump 2 weeks ago. And then after that, they decided to do a video and have 20 of these people give a 3-minute summary of their views on what they thought happened on 9/11. Right. And of course, my area of expertise was in aviation, and in 2000, would have been in January of 2008, I submitted a 13-page affidavit to the Southern District of New York Court District in support of Morgan Reynolds' quid-am complaint, which he had filed, and I explained technically why it was impossible for a Boeing 767 to have flown at those speeds that that NIST said it had, and the other things that it was alleged to have done. Of course, there were no airplanes; those are holograms. But these, I gave the summary of why it couldn't have been an airplane. I end up by saying that for somebody with limited piloting experience, it was impossible to take over a glass cockpit Boeing 767, fly it 100 miles to New York, do a 180 degree turn at Colts Neck, descend 20,000 feet, and at 500 miles an hour hit a target 208 feet wide, dead center at 500 miles an hour. I mean, just absolutely ridiculous. At the height of my career, I could have not done anything like that.
Yeah, the physics don't add up to you, and even you know this is erroneous.
Now, what did you say? I didn't hear.
Oh, I said even you know this was erroneous.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I wrote my affidavit, and it was in addition to Morgan Reynolds' quittem complaint, which was a suit against the 20-plus different companies that participated in the 9/11. That was Boeing, SIAC, United Airlines, American Airlines, Research Projects, who design and build direct energy weapons. And what happened is the judge, his name was George B. Davis. I think that was his name. No, Daniels, George B. Daniels, dismissed the case with prejudice, and not knowing a thing about it or caring a thing about it. He didn't have the courage, the moral courage, to go in and let this suit happen, so he just dismissed it.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know any of this was going on with you, John, either, by the way, the whole recording. And also, another thing that just came to mind very randomly here was when you discussed 9/11 with Art Bell, he was very... it was very rough for him to talk about this, and understandable at the time. Most people didn't really want to believe that the government could have possibly had knowledge prior or even helped with this event.
100% correct. People didn't want to believe that their government would do such a thing, and neither did Art Bell. And he kept saying over and over and over, I can't believe that our president had anything to do with this. Well, nobody said the president had anything to do with this.
Correct. Yeah.
It was certainly insiders, but not necessarily the president. They wouldn't have briefed him on this, mainly for deniability. But I had been on his show many, many times over the years, and I believe it was in 2002 that we parted ways over this issue.
It was because of 9/11?
And he said, after that, he started calling me a wingnut. And
oh, that's good.
On the website, it was just cranking up in those times. My little icon was a wingnut that would spin up and down.
Yes, and I don't recall that was the reason why that you two parted ways, but yeah, it sounds like.
What did you think it was?
Well, no, I didn't know exactly. And to be honest with you, at one point I even had unfriended Art, maybe about a year or two ago, because of some of his rantings online. I was just getting a little annoyed, and I was starting to unfriend lots of people, and Art was one of them, and now I feel terrible about it, so I had to make it public. And of course, Art passed away recently, and everyone is still a bit shocked. They can't believe he passed.
Yeah. Or how he passed, which was an overdose of oxycodone and several other drugs.
Yes, that is terrible. And of course, you yourself have been dealing with a lot of pain, if I remember in the past, John, with, what was it, your back?
Yeah, I broke my back, and I had many physical problems. I went into the hospital in 2008, and I was in and out of the hospital for about 4 years. And when I came out, they hadn't done much to relieve the pain, and my doctor put me on methadone and oxycodone, which I took for many years. And 1 year ago, May 31st, the Drug Enforcement Administration put out a edict that anybody taking opioids had to get that prescription from pain management specialists. And so my doctor assigned me a pain management specialist. I went in May 31st, 2017, gave them a urine sample, and picked up my prescription. And 2 days later, the doctor calls Mary, my wife, and said they can't handle me anymore because the drug scan of the urine test showed that I was taking methamphetamine. Well, that is so absolutely outrageously impossible. You know, I hadn't left my den for 10 years. I wouldn't know where to get that kind of a drug. If I got it, I wouldn't know how to take it.
Yes.
And I certainly wouldn't be taking it in addition to oxycodone and methadone. But the long of the short of it was that the drug scan showed I was taking huge amounts of methamphetamine. And, of course, when the pharmacy found out about it, they refused to give me any more opioids under penalty of law. And I went into involuntary detox, I think July 23rd of last year, and almost passed away. If it hadn't been for my good friend Bob Lazar, I wouldn't be here today. But what happened is, after fighting the involuntary detox for 3 weeks, I called Bob and said, I'm not going to make it, Bob. And he had been following my problem. I said, you know, I just can't handle it anymore. This detox is getting to me, and I can't get any more oxycodone. And he said, well, try this that we've just heard about. It's a herb from Southeast Asia. It's called kratom, Kratom, distributed mostly out of Oregon. And see if that'll help you. So I started taking kratom, and it instantly made me feel better. And I was able to cope with the detox. And I've been off for, it's August 14th, so I've been off for 13 months now. And have no desire for opiates. I wouldn't take it even if it was offered me. But I do use kratom, which you can get on the web. And it has all the properties and benefits of oxycodone, but no opioids. And of course, because it is so helpful, the opioid produced has dropped drastically along with the sales, and Big Pharma is going nuts, and they essentially own the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Federal Drug Administration, and CDC, and they're trying to make an effort to make kratom a Schedule I drug, the same as heroin. And
that's terrible.
And they might make it, but you know, they tried it about a year ago, and the White House got so many letters. I think it was over, I can't remember what the figure was, hundreds of thousands of letters of people supporting it, not only from people using it, but doctors and lawyers saying the benefits of this. So the DEA backed off, and have been very quiet since then. But they are ready to, make an attack on Kratom, and I would imagine, I thought it was going to come the first quarter of this year, but it didn't happen yet. So I don't know what the status is. I get mine from the smoke shop up on the corner here in Las Vegas. There's probably 30 or 40 of them here, and they always have an ample supply of Kratom.
Well, what about?
There's all kinds of different. There are all kinds of different Kratom. There's, there's some for pain. There's some for anxiety. There's some for just about everything. And when you buy it, usually the seller will have information on what would be the best for you. So.
Right. And what about CBD oil?
Apparently that's good. I don't use it myself, but I've seen some very good things about it.
Yeah, there's intoxicating marijuana extracts out there that you can use that I believe would be helpful for everyone.
Yeah, it could. I don't try it, and I don't use marijuana for the simple reason it doesn't do anything for me except make me feel bad.
It makes you feel bad.
So I'm not a candidate for marijuana.
Understood. And I did want to leap back in time yet again here and go into Bob Lazar, since you did mention him and we were talking about that until I cut you off there, and I do apologize. Let's start something current before we go back in time. When was the last time you talked to our good friend Bob Lazar?
I think a week ago. I forget what the occasion was, but he has a scientific supply shop in Lanesburg, Michigan, called Scientific Nuclear, or I'll think the name in a second, but he distributes scientific parts worldwide to different universities and schools and companies.
Very good. I'm glad you are still in communication with our friend Bob Lazar. And I'm glad he's still active out there.
He's what?
I said I'm glad he's still very active out there.
Yeah. He lives in Michigan and operates out of there.
Very good. And of course, I recall one of the last things we did talk about was a little bit about your photograph you took of Groom Lake. I believe you're the only person who had taken this photo.
Now, what was that photograph about, what?
Groom Lake.
Oh, yeah. The ones I posted on...
Your website, right.
On website, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was in 1977. And I was watching TV one evening, and there was a news story, and it said, security leak at the test site. And I think they actually mentioned Groom Lake. And so I called up the studio the next day and got a hold of the production manager and asked him a little bit about the story and asked him if we could have lunch. And that happened to be Bob Stoldow, and I think he's vice president or something of Channel 8 here. But anyway, back in 77, we went to lunch, and we talked about Groom Lake and his thoughts on it. He says, I believe that United Press International and Associated Press are going to hike in next week and expose it. And when he said that, I thought, well, holy smokes, I wanted to hike in there, and so I thought I'd do that before the news people did, and the following week I was working for an airline here in Las Vegas called Bonanza Airlines, and on a particular Monday we weren't flying, so I called up a couple of the guys and I said, do you want to go on a secret mission? And they said, of course. So we left at 5 o'clock in the morning, drove up to Groom Lake, and of course in 1977 there were no gates or anything. You could drive right up to the lake bed, and the lake was full of water at that time. And I took a roll of, in those days I was shooting black and white, and I took a roll of 36. And about the time that I was able to finish this roll, we saw some trucks across the way. They were making a little dust trail headed our way. So I knew they were going to take the film, so what I did is I rewound the film that was in the camera and took the little cartridge and in the door of my Lincoln Continental, I pulled out the ashtray, put the film in the little opening there, and then put the ashtray back on. Then I took another brand new roll of film, ran it to the camera, took the identical same 36 pictures, and then waited. And of course, security comes up, and there's two trucks. There's a security truck, and in front of him is just a worker. And so the security guy gets out. There's a little chain across two poles there. He lets the guy out, and he turns around to hook up the chain, and he sees us. There we are, sitting with in front of my Lincoln Continental, and I got my two friends with us, and I've got the camera mounted on a tripod. He said, "Are you guys from the news?" And we said, "No, we're just here exploring the desert." I said, "I guess we're not supposed to be here." He said, "Hell no, you're not supposed to be here."
Right.
So he called security, and they came out, and I guess, they were there for about an hour questioning us and all kinds of things. And then they told us, "Okay, now here's the deal. You guys are going to leave here right now and go back to Vegas, and next week somebody will call you, and you'll get a briefing, and then you'll get a debriefing." And so we drove home and never heard from them again. There was never any briefing, never any debriefing, and the only time the subject ever came up again was in 1979. I got a job flying for the Department of Energy, and I had to have a Q clearance. And during the briefing they give you when you get a clearance like that, the subject came up of the issue and what happened at Groom Lake. And that's the last I ever heard of it.
Interesting. And how exactly were you approached to work for the CIA, if you don't mind me asking?
Pardon?
How were you approached to join the CIA, by the way?
I didn't know I was working for them. I was working for a company in Florida, ferrying airplanes to Vietnam from the factory in Wichita, Kansas. And somebody mentioned on one of the overnight stops there that this was a CIA operation. And, of course, it made sense because we were treated differently than just being regular pilots. And that's how I found out. So
understood.
I did that for 4 years.
Understood. So no trips to Mena, Arkansas then?
No.
Understood.
I stuck to the Pacific. We'd pick up the new forward air control airplanes in Wichita, fly to Hamilton Air Force Base in San Francisco, and then to Hickam Air Force Base in Honolulu. then to Midway Island, Wake Island, Guam, the Philippines, Clark Air Force Base, and then delivered in-country to Nha Trang in South Vietnam.
Yeah, it seems like those were great times for you, and you were even shot down.
Later, I had gone to Cambodia to fly for an airline there, and I was a year there flying out of Phnom Penh, and then I went up to fly in Vientiane in Laos for the CIA. There was two companies up there that flew for the agency. One was Air America, and the other was Continental Air Services. I worked for Continental Services. I flew Curtiss C-46s and de Havilland Twin Otters, and both of those airplanes were used to supply both rice and ammunition to the Army, which was supported. Just a second, Marilyn. Can you put that in the refrigerator, please? Thank you.
And John, taking a little break there. No worries.
So, what was I talking about?
You were talking about your trip when you were shot down.
Oh, yeah. So we flew Twin Otters and C-46s, and both airplanes were used to supply rice to the villagers that were forced to move south in London. And hard rice. Hard rice is euphemism for guns and ammunition. And we supplied those to the Army, which of course was led by General Vang Pao, who was the CIA's fair-haired boy in charge of the Laotian Army. And we were delivering. I was flying the Twin Otter, and it's a cargo turboprop airplane made in Canada, and its capacity was 6 loads of equipment. And what would happen is they were loaded into the airplane at whatever base you were operating out of, and they'd fly up to where the soldiers were, and after ground attack and ground connection, and you identified who you were dropping to, we'd fly over, and on each pass, when you were directly over the soldiers, you would give a signal to the guy in the back, and he would push a box out, which had a big parachute. They call them G7s, and they would instantly inflate, and the package would land safely on the ground. So we went in, and we had delivered 4 of these packages, and on the 5th pass, just after we made our turn, after we pushed it out, the guy in back, we called them kickers because they kicked the stuff out, came yelling up in front, "Cop!" And we looked back, and the entire fuselage was filled with a spray, a foam, that smelled exactly like gasoline or jet fuel, which is what it was. And what had happened is they had shot the right engine out, including the strut where the fuel line was, and the fuel was spraying out and winding around in back of the airplane. And because of the airflow in this cargo airplane, it would come back in the cargo door and fill the airplane up with gasoline fumes. And of course, we immediately started back to friendly base, and in all of Southeast Asia, there's a couple of C-130s that used to orbit with all different kinds of radios and equipment and other support equipment, and they were there to help anybody who needed help. For instance, their call sign in the daytime was Cricket, and at nighttime it was Moonbeam. And if you got into trouble, you'd call them and say, Cricket, this is Pop Golf Victor, the identification of your airplane. We've just been hit. We're heading south. That kind of information. Of course, Cricket would then alert the rescue troops or rescue airplanes and helicopters and start heading your way. But the problem with when we got hit, here's an airplane totally full of atomized fuel, and I knew that as soon as I pressed that mic button, there would be a very tiny spark, but enough to blow everything up. And so my choice was, do I get help from Cricket or ensure that the airplane can't blow up by not saying anything? And I decided to go ahead and try it. I covered up the microphone real carefully with my hands and my shirt, and managed to get the report out. And we managed to get into a base and get the airplane repaired. We were in the air by the next morning.
Wow. I'm not even sure how you're even able to be a pilot, John. I'm a little scared of flying, to be honest with you. I have to kind of have a drink or two to get on an airplane.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, I have to do something to get on there. I get very anxious.
Well, I always loved flying, and it was part of me, and I don't know whether I was a pilot in a previous life, but it was,
yeah.
I loved it, and I loved flying different airplanes in different places, and I really enjoyed my career. I totaled out with 19,600 hours and 44 years of flying, and got a lot of stories, had a lot of fun, but I'm done with it now. I don't even go flying, and the main reason I don't go flying is because I don't want to have to subject myself to the inhumanities, the ungraciousness of TSA. It's just not in me to go through all it, to take my shoes off to prove that I don't have any weapons on board an airliner, so I just don't bother going.
I don't blame you for that. It is quite tedious just going to an airport, especially nowadays. And, you know, we'll jump into a lot of these things, but just curious, what was the catalyst for your interest in UFOs and extraterrestrials? Was it the sighting you had when you were flying, John, that first sparked your interest in this and being almost obsessed with this subject? I mean, I am myself pretty obsessed with this too, John, so I don't mean that in a negative way.
Yeah, it was nothing I saw when I flew. It was, like I said, meeting the pilot that I'd known in Southeast Asia, and he told me that the Bentwaters incident was true, that a saucer had landed at this U.S. Air Force base north of London, and there had been 3 aliens in it who got out and walked around, and it had been filmed by the Air Force, and Colonel, how do I ever forget his name, and it was a real incident, and that's what, you know, I thought, it's real? I mean, there are flying saucers? And when my friend said yes, then I knew this was something that I'd have to get into and find out about it. And it really took over my life to the point where my wife was going nuts because I was getting phone calls nonstop. People were knocking on the door nonstop, and it was driving her nuts. So
yes, I can imagine.
At one point, she hid all my files and changed my phone numbers.
Oh, my.
And put me out of business for a while, but through some freak accident, I had been over on a trip in Germany, and I called her up, and she said, well, I saw him, but I still don't believe him. She had been working out in the backyard here in Las Vegas up on Sunrise Mountain, and she had been planting some flowers, and two of these saucers, these craft, came out of the mountain, out of Sunrise Mountain, and flew south about halfway up the mountain, and then disappeared. And my daughter, 8-year-old daughter, Jackie, was there and watched it too. And of course, since she saw it, she had a little bit different view on it, and maybe a little bit of compassion, and that I wasn't nuts, but because she had seen him. But that helped me out a little bit.
Understood. And, something just came to my mind, and I'm not quite sure if I've ever asked you about that, and that's the Phoenix Lights incident. Do you have any recollection of that sighting, John?
What sighting?
The Great Phoenix Lights sighting.
Well, a friend of mine, a Southwest pilot, had been there, and he told me, it was definitely a strange craft. He said they were flying a missing man formation, and so he didn't ever know of any extraterrestrials flying missing man formation, so it was probably us in some of our unknown exotic aircraft we have flying.
Yes, and of course you've been to many different sort of top-level bases in your time and have gotten information. And going back to E.T., Los Alamos apparently had an alien there. Do you have any more info on that?
Info on what?
On the alleged alien that was at Los Alamos base.
No, there was supposed to have been one or two of the ETs that were recovered from the Roswell crash that were incarcerated at Los Alamos National Labs, and it was in a facility called YY-2. And I used to explore all around Los Alamos. I'd drive over there with Bob. He had a contract to rebuild alpha probes. So alpha probes are radiation probes, and every couple of months he'd get a contract to go in and repair 300 or 400 of them. And I would go with him. He'd drive from Las Vegas. It was about a 14-hour drive east to Albuquerque, and then north to Santa Fe, and then northwest to Los Alamos. And it would take us about 12 hours to rebuild these 400 alpha probes. And then if we had any extra time, we'd drive around Los Alamos, and he would show me all the places that he worked and all the hidden places. And there was a hidden place just south of the McDonald's, and you had to get there by a very interesting way, following roads and turning here and going down dirt roads, and you get down to this one place, and it was a huge door. It was about 30 feet high and about 30 feet wide. It was a big metal door, and it was in the side of a mountain, and there was a huge gate there, which had guards on it. And I never saw anything go in or out, and I never saw it open. But whatever it used for was something very big and very secret.
Very interesting, yes. And, one of the last things we did talk about when you were here were all these different massive underground bases out there. And, that does remind me, I did have, before I go on, I just wanted to quickly add that Las Vegas and New Mexico, these places are just, for some reason, filled with activity Wouldn't you agree, John?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was flying for the Department of Energy in 1980, 1981, my job was to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and get in OB-10 Bronco, which is a North American turboprop, and fly up to the Nevada test site. And I would fly around the perimeter of where they used to do the underground nuclear tests. And my job was to give them the wind direction and wind speed from ground level up to 10,000 feet. And the reason they needed that was they wanted to be sure in case when they set the shot off that if it vented, that it wasn't going to blow towards Las Vegas. And they didn't care if it blew north, but they didn't want it blowing towards Las Vegas. So for the 2 or 3 hours before they detonated the nukes, I would fly the perimeter of the area where they had built the hole and put the nuke down about a mile or so, and radio in the wind direction and wind speed. Well, during this time, it gave me a pretty good view of a lot of interesting places now. Unfortunately, Groom Lake was not one of them because it was too far out in the northeast to get a good view of it, but I saw other places where there was a lot of construction going on, specifically on the Paiute Mesa, which is in the dead center of the Nevada test site, and that whole area was very white in color, and I couldn't figure out what I was looking at because it looked like 70 or 80 acres of just white stuff, and I didn't know what it was. And I found out later, maybe 10 years later, that what they had done was they were building a secret base called Sandia, and it was exactly halfway between the Tonopah Test Range and Groom Lake. And they had taken off the top of a mountain and built the base inside of the mountain and then put the top back on the mountain and covered up the base. And it was a huge area. In addition to the laboratories and the parts that I'm telling you about right now, there was another construction project right next to it, and these were 5 holes. And what they had done is they'd set off very clean nuclear blasts, 5 of them, and then they tunneled down from the surface down a mile below to where the opening was, and they started building quarters where people could live, not only housing but places to eat and places to exercise and all kinds of facilities. And there was 5 of them, and each one held 15,000 armed combat troops. So in the addition to all the scientists that worked at Sandia on a daily basis, which was 2,000, they had 75,000 armed combat troops on duty at all times. Now, what they were on duty for, I don't know. I don't know who would be attacking them. But anyway, that's what they were there for. So when they finished up building this huge facility, would have been about 1985 or 86, they had to figure out a way to move 2,000 people a day up to Sandia to work and back to Las Vegas at night when they were done working. And that's a lot of people, and their problem was they couldn't use airplanes because it would tip off other people that there was something big going on, and they didn't want anybody to know anything about it. So they couldn't use buses or cars. So what they ended up doing was building a super secret mag maglev high-speed subway from the Luxor Hotel and Casino to the Bellagio Hotel and Casino to Sandia.
Yeah, this is where I wanted to. This is where I wanted to connect things here with you, John. When I mentioned interesting sites in Vegas, like you said, the fake casino that hides that massive underground construction, the super secret subway that you speak of, very interesting stuff.
Yeah, now what they did is they had Las Vegas had just finished raising the Stardust that is demolishing it, and there were 74 acres of vacant land, and it was exactly where they were going to use to tunnel down and build the subway, because, you build the subway from the top, not from the inside. So you have to have a large area where you can move all these tunneling pieces of equipment and tunnels down in there, and places for people to meet and pick up their equipment and go down inside the earth to build these tunnels. And what they did is, of course, this is right on the Strip, and people would have seen this, so to hide it, Boyd Construction, who was in charge of it, built a fake casino called Echelon. And they told everybody that they were building a casino, and it was going to be big and beautiful and da-da-da-da-da. And all it was to hide the construction from the people moving up and down Las Vegas Boulevard, the people moving up and down Industrial Road, and the cars and people moving on Desert Inn Road. And that's all it was for. And the people that worked on this fake casino, they only built the framework. They didn't build anything inside.
Right.
They were told that when they reported for work that morning that they were not to look over the side towards the empty lot. Under any circumstance, don't look over, because they said, we have CIA sharpshooters with high-powered rifles that will kill you instantly. Now, I don't know how they got that approved with OSHA, but apparently nobody looked over, nobody got killed, at least that I know of. But they did get this huge subway, massive subway project built and in operation. It operates today, every day. And not only that, it doesn't only go to Sandia, it goes to Groom Lake, Tonopah, and several secret bases that are north of Las Vegas. There's one that's right on the Utah-Nevada border, 44 miles south of Wendover, Utah, and that's where all many of the black triangles fly out of. And it's a huge base there, and it's hidden by holograms. And holograms hide things that are in plain sight, and they use that to hide these secret bases all over the U.S., and they use it to hide up there.
Yes, and on the last episode, we did talk a little bit about the secret underground naval facility, which is a bit outside of Vegas, I recall.
What is it you said it went?
Oh, the underground facility, perhaps closer to Reno. I think the last time we talked, we discussed the U.S. Navy submarine base that's in the desert.
Oh, yeah, that's the Navy submarine base at Hawthorne, Nevada.
Right.
And the U.S. Navy found out about 40 years ago that the 7 western states of the United States sits on a shelf floating on the Pacific Ocean, so that submarines can go under these 7 western states and go anywhere they want, and they can have access to the ground if somebody builds an elevator from into the Pacific Ocean. In the case of Hawthorne, it goes down 3,200 feet because 3,200 feet is the altitude of Hawthorne. And to get down to the Pacific Ocean, you have a elevator that goes down 3,200 feet. There's a huge submarine base under there. There's maybe 5 or 10 nuclear submarines parked there at all times, in and out. And what they do there is, ever since submarines came into use, they've had to have specific weapons, missiles, for those submarines, and it was built in an underground secret facility to the north and west of Hawthorne, and it was hidden in the mountains. And what would they do is when they finished production, they would have to ship it north through Reno to Alameda in San Francisco Bay, or south through Las Vegas to San Diego, to the Navy station down there. And of course they didn't want it that visible. People could see the trucks moving. They didn't know it was on them, but they wanted that secret. So about that time they discovered the Pacific Ocean was under the shelf of the 7 western states, and they built an elevator, and instead of moving the weapons and missiles on the ground, on the highways, they just took it in the elevator down to the Pacific Ocean and loaded it there. And the submarines would enter this shelved area from 2 places. One was at Monterey Bay, and the other was at Malibu. And those are the 2 main entrances for the underwater areas. And when you drive into Hawthorne, there's a big sign there that says Naval Undersea Warfare Center. And for years I would see that sign, and I'm thinking, Warfare Center, what are they talking about? There's a lake here. It's 15 miles long and 100 feet deep, and they're going to use that to train underwater warfare ships.
Yeah, that's confusing. Right.
And only years later did I find out, what they meant was, there's access to the Pacific Ocean, and there's submarines, pens under there. Now, why they chose to advertise that, I don't know. They have openings, elevator areas all over these 7 western states. You can be driving out in the middle of Colorado and see a sign, Undersea Naval Warfare Center, and that's where one of the elevators is. And I don't know why they chose that. I guess they wouldn't believe that anybody in their wildest imagination would believe that there's elevators that go down to the Pacific Ocean at this particular location.
You know, I tend to believe you, John. I don't think any of this is simply made up whatsoever. I think these things do exist out there, and there are many of them. I did want to discuss the moon with you. Lots of discussion going on there lately, especially in the political realm. Mike Pence has been talking a lot about this alleged Trump Space Force. What do you make of this, John?
Well, there's 2 schools of thought. First of all, there's been a Space Force for 40 years, and it's run by the Navy, and it's huge. And it was financed by the faked Apollo missions, the faked Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo missions that NASA run in the 60s. And that $40 billion was siphoned off to use for the Navy projects, which they started building in those days and have been building ever since. And they have enormous orbiting weapons, direct energy weapons, that they use to level buildings 1, 2, and 7 during 9/11, and the Mira building, and to start the California fires. They also have orbiting laboratories, and the laboratories, they make hull material for aircraft carriers and submarines. And this hull material has to be made in zero gravity and is used in place of other material because it's lighter and it's stronger, and with a small electrical charge, it can keep the ocean water between 5 and 7 centimeters away from the hull. Now, as you know, the limit speed for any hull displacement ship is 1.34 times the square root of the waterline, which limits just about anything to about 45 knots. But these new aircraft carriers, like the Gerald Ford was just launched, and the USS Colorado was just launched, those ships can go 100 knots because there's no drag. Because when you use this material called D.D, made in orbit, it keeps, with a small electrical charge, it keeps the water away from the hull, and there's essentially no drag. So all they need is big propellers. Now on submarines they don't use propellers anymore. They have a water propulsion system that's stronger and quieter. But on aircraft carriers they still use the propellers. And they have all this new technology, and you'll notice when the Navy does announce the launching of the USS Colorado, and it's full of real top secret technology, super advanced technology. They can't tell you what the technology is, but fortunately I can, and there's 3 parts of the technology. One is the D.D for the hull, and the other is they use fusion engines. Now we're told, the public is told, that fusion will not be available for another decade, and in fact we've been using it for the last 14 years, and fusion of course is much more efficient than fission, and is much lighter and much more powerful. So whereas we might use 3 or 5 fission reactors in a submarine, we would only need 2 to do the same job in an aircraft carrier of fusion engines. And same thing with submarines, where we might only use 2 fission reactors. We can get the job done with a 1 fusion reactor. And we have a new secret club this year for SEAL Team delivery. It's about 70 feet long. It has a fusion reactor for power. I think there's about 24 or 25 people that man this thing. And there's a 12-man SEAL delivery unit where they can deliver SEAL teams anywhere and everywhere at tremendous speeds. And it's really a very interesting piece of equipment. I've never heard anybody discuss it,
right,
or show pictures of it.
Yes.
But it's there. So that's all I know.
Understood. Thank you for that. And John, I did want to ask you a bit about this latest tragedy, really. I'm sure you understand and have read about this completely, and that's with that airline employee stealing that plane in Seattle. Yeah, what was that all about? What's your take on that? And by the way, I do have some audio clips of him speaking to the traffic controller. Do you want me to play a clip of that?
No, I think we all heard it.
Okay, you heard that, obviously.
But,
yes. Okay, good.
I wrote
I didn't want to play it
for my Facebook this morning and telling about the fact that the FAA will never publicize any airline disasters they were caused by pilot suicide, and some of the ones I know about is United Airlines Flight 585 in Colorado City I believe in 1991. And what happened was the captain was dating the first officer, a female, and she had caught him the night before with another, a flight attendant. And so they get in the airplane to fly from Denver to Colorado, and they argued all the way down. And so just as they're about to land, the female co-pilot says, that she's not going to date him anymore. And he says, well, if I can't have you, nobody can have you.
Oh, no.
And he rolls the airplane upside down and pulls it through like the beginning of a split S. And they hit vertically at 350 miles an hour. And, of course, killed everybody on board. And there was a mass frantic effort by the FAA and the NTSB and United Airlines to cover it up and keep that information to the public, because they can't have an airline captain killing himself and all passengers on board because he has an issue with the co-pilot. And then a few years later, there was a similar accident in Pittsburgh with U.S. Air Boeing 727 Flight 427, and the identical accident happened where, for whatever reason, the captain rolled the airplane upside down and then pulled it through at the beginning of a split S, and they hit vertically. And another frantic effort by the FAA and NTSB to cover it up. And this one, they decided to blame the yaw damper, which, my father many years ago was one of the main inventors of the yaw damper, and so I know quite a bit about it, and I know that there's no possible way that a yaw damper could be responsible for rolling a plane inverted and pulling it through. It's not going to happen. But then I also mentioned how far the FAA and NTSB will go to cover up the truth, whereas if you remember Flight 800, TWA Boeing 747 off the coast of Long Island was accidentally shot down by a U.S. Navy submarine. They were using it for target practice, and the missile got away from them, and it blew the 747 up and killed everybody on board. And there was such a massive frantic effort to cover it up. The President Clinton's security chief, Richard B. Clark, and James Kallstrom, who was assistant director of the FBI, coordinated the main effort to cover it up and come up with the excuse that a center tank fuel pump, the wiring of which had caused a fire, which caused an explosion, which blew the airplane up, which of course was totally false. And at the time, I happened to be flying Boeing aircraft parts newly manufactured from Wichita to Seattle. And the Boeing guys that we met on both ends were absolutely livid that the FAA was trying to blame the fuel pumps for a fire, which is impossible to happen.
Yeah.
But that's what they did. And then I said that, people want to know, well, didn't people come forward? Wouldn't somebody admit, well, yes, they tried to tell the truth, but the guy who wrote the book about it was sent to prison, and Boeing, to keep their mouth shut, was paid off with government okay of the merger with McDonnell Douglas, which they had been in court with over 6 years, tied up in antitrust suits by the government. And of course, the government said, if you keep your mouth shut, we'll let you merge with McDonnell Douglas. They did. And then TWA, in order for them to keep their mouth shut, was given a $360 million sweetheart loan, which didn't have to be paid back. And then, of course, what did the passengers get? They didn't get anything because they were dead. So
Right, no doubt. That's the way the cookie crumbles, as they say.
Right.
John, I do want to thank you tremendously for being a part of the program. We barely scratched the surface here. But of course, before I let you go, did we land on the moon in '69?
No, absolutely not. I can give you about 25 reasons if you had the time, but the basic reasons are that, number one, E.T., the aliens, put a radiation belt around the Earth that extends from 500 miles altitude to 25,000 miles altitude, and it's specifically there so that we can't go anywhere. They don't want us out there. We're not ready to go out there. We're just a planet that's in the middle of tribal endeavors here, and they don't want us to take our ideas of envy, hate, and greed out into the solar system. Our solar system is much, much bigger than NASA tells you. We're told that there's only 8 planets out there, and there's actually 40, and there's so much going on out there. Each of the 40 planets has civilizations, and each of the 40 planets has their own moons, which have other civilizations, and they trade with each other, both technology and farming technology, and food stuff, and it's a huge operation, but we're not part of it. We're on Earth, and our sole effort, what we're supposed to do here on Earth is to live our lives with integrity, without envy, without hate, without greed, and to express our love to our families each and every day. That's all we got to do, and that's what we're put on Earth for. And of course, all of us have lived many lives before, and will live many lives after this. And our lives after this will be infinitely better if we learn how to live our lives with integrity, without envy, hate, or greed. But meanwhile, E.T. is not, while we're learning this and while we're educating our souls, they don't want us messing around in the solar system. There's too much cause for problems that they don't need.
Yeah, very well said. And over the years, you acquired a number of naysayers, the critics. Since that time, I heard you over 20 years ago now. I never once thought you were, I never felt you were not being genuine in what you spoke about then and now. I'm glad we were able to do this again, John. And it's always an honor and privilege when I'm able to bring you on to the program. So I definitely want to bring you on here again in the very near future, my friend.
Okay, Mike, call me anytime.
All right. Take care, John, and God bless.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
And there goes Mr. John Lear. If you are listening to this on a replay, keep in mind you can listen every Saturday night, 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, 11 p.m. Eastern Time, live on the TuneIn Radio app. And if you enjoy the program and want to help fund this great project, go to michaeldecon.com and click the little donate button there. And if you stick around long enough, you'll catch me doing another show with Eric Kajewski. I'm Michael Decon. Thank you for listening. And with that said, the world is a mysterious place, and life itself is a mystery. Until next time, good night, everybody.
Yeah, is that useful to you?
Oh, you betcha, yeah.
Yeah.
Say die.
The real truth. The real truth is that the people who are in power who put this system together have been in power for thousands of years. This has been going on from day one.
Was it 1997, Michael?